The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
We've got quite a few people connected. So yeah, there we go. I think you're doing me. I certainly don't want you to take your lunch hour and sit there and have to just look at me for an hour. So thanks for attending. I appreciate all the participation. It was a fabulous 2015 webinar series. We had a great time. We presented four. We'll get some feedback here if you could turn that on. We presented 4 or 5 webinars in 2015. By far, the most attended was the webinar on tuition rates, and increasing tuition rates, which is a little soapbox I tend to get on, but I am going to mention that. So somebody give me a little feedback here. I guess you're hearing me now, but we probably need to move the computer because we get audio's now back. Thank you. Somebody's fabulous over there giving me some feedback, but let's move the other computer to another part of all this so that we're not getting the feedback. So, okay. So again, thank you. 28 states represented. One of the things that we found is that there are people in the industry. Do we have sound? Yay! Okay. I thought someone said, I can hear you now. Can you hear me now? Okay. Thank you. I apologize for that. I think that I'm not sure exactly what was happening, but I'd like to blame it on the storm that we had last night and very strong wind, and there were some power outages in the internet this morning. So let's go with that as an issue. So thanks for your patience and sorry about that. I'm going to start completely over. Thank you for being with us. We appreciate you taking your lunch hour and spending with us. We had a great 2015 webinar series. That was our first year. We like to specialize in sharing the information that we have from a business and financial perspective with people all across the country. And really not that we really are smarter than anybody else for sure, but all we do all day is talk to people about what's happening in the industry. So we just have the pleasure of a lot of information, and there's a lack of places to go in the industry to get that type of information. So we like to make it our mission to share as much as we can with people. By far, the most attended webinar of last year was a discussion about increasing tuition rates and how that was something that the industry struggled with recently, and by recently, actually since 2009, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And then also we had a great discussion about discounts and how you might make up for some lack of being able to raise tuition rates by changes in your other charges and discounts. And if you're interested in that, you can pick up a recording of any of the webinars we did in 2015 on our website. So they're all recorded there. This one will be released in a couple of days. So everyone that we did in 2015 is there. So certainly pick those up if you're interested. So a little bit of housekeeping. You should have a panel box over to your right. There is a place for you to ask questions, and I think you guys are really good at it because you're giving me some great feedback about the sound, and it's quiet now, which makes me think that we're on the right track. But certainly as we go, feel free to ask questions. If I see one that sounds like it needs clarity during the webinar, I'll stop and take that and speak to it. I plan about 40 minutes of information, and then we take the last 15 or 20 minutes to answer questions and get you out of here by the time your lunch hour is over so that you can get back to your important work. So thank you for joining us. We have 100 participants. We max out at 100, and we have 28 states represented. That's really an honor to us to have that many people spend this hour with us. Of the 100 people, it's a very diverse population. We have people we know, people we've met, people we would like to get to know. We have single site owners represented. We have small multi-site owners represented. We have some large national groups represented, some private equity companies, a friendly competitor who we're always happy to have. And we just appreciate this large diverse group of people. So as we do all of our workshops and seminars, we always start the first couple of minutes at least with an update on what we're seeing happen in the industry. And again, just in an attempt to be sure that there's some information out there for people that they maybe get a new idea or figure out where the industry's going and how that might impact them. So we thought that for this first one of 2016, it might just be good to do a recap of the industry in general. So what I have planned for today are really three parts to my update. The first one I'd like to talk about is some significant changes we saw in 15 in business operations. What kinds of things we saw in total of people that were doing, making changes in the way they operate and the way they, and the things that they see from a business perspective in the industry. The second group of ideas we want to talk about is the buying and selling patterns that we saw in 2015. And because that's the bulk of our work, that's the bulk of what we see and hear and know about. So there's a good bit of information there. And then the third thing I'd like to talk about is our kind of forecast for 2016, which is always tricky to do. We see some patterns that I would suspect would continue into 16. I certainly couldn't have predicted some of the other things that have happened in the past. So, you'll take my prediction with a grain of salt, just like everybody else's. But we do want to mention a few things that seem to be on either an increase or an upswing, and we would expect to continue into 2016. So to get started with our information, let's talk a little bit about changes in business operations. We saw some interesting collaborations really take hold and increase during the year last year. One of those is that we've seen a real nice partnership with Head Start in some places, and many of our providers are enjoying this relationship. So while this is not a new idea, I've actually seen it go on for at least 20 years, maybe more. Possible types of collaborations would be where Head Start would need additional slots and they don't have the room in their facilities, and they may pay a provider to mainstream students into a particular classroom. Another one would be that the provider would meet their standards and provide a self-contained classroom for a certain age group. Another one would be that a provider might rent a classroom or multiple classrooms to Head Start as additional space. And another thing that we've seen that's been interesting is expanding slots in early Head Start, which would be infant through 3-year-old age groups. So while the Head Start funding has been very stable across, many years, and of course available everywhere in the country, that's not always the case for other funding sources like state and federal subsidies and even private pay tuition. So in some areas, we've seen providers make very nice partnerships with Head Start and be able to offer them a service while making the school stronger. The trick to this is really to just get to know the Head Start organization in your community and try to build a relationship with that person. So on that idea and any others, if you'd like more detail, we're certainly happy to act as a resource. The second thing that we've seen is that there are some operators who have very aggressive expansion plans. And if you are an independent provider, you've probably noticed that the fastest growing part of our industry are the franchise groups. The franchise groups have pretty aggressive growth plans, and they have been successful. They provide a good quality service, and they have entered some new markets. And so that has been an increase in our industry and increased competition in some places. I'm always one that believes that good quality competition makes the entire industry stronger. So I'm generally a fan, but you probably are noticing that there's a good bit of expansion among those companies. There's one company that's been very interesting that I get a lot of questions about, and I don't have, I have not done any work with, so, but do know some of their top people is Children's Learning Adventure. And I mention them because their model is a bit different from what we consider to be the norm in quality early education, and that their schools are a bit bigger than the average school. They're typically 25 to 40,000 square feet. They have a very nice facility with some unique features. And they are entering some new markets and getting a good bit of attention that way. So I'm getting a lot of questions from providers about their model, how it might be different. I found them to be great to talk to and visit. And so I think if they come into your city, they would probably be very happy to talk more with you and let you see their school. So a bit of a different concept, but it is something that we're hearing a lot of questions about. So I bring it up for that reason. Another, so one of the things that I like to say is that I built a financial model. I talk about this every workshop. So if you've ever been with me before, you've heard this multiple times, and I hope that gives you some comfort, because what I say about that is that I built a financial model about 20 plus years ago, and very little has changed when I look at what I would expect a financially healthy school to do operationally and to produce. Very little in those 20 years has changed. And what that says to me is that we're a very back to basics industry, that once you cover those things, you are in pretty good shape. There's another webinar we did last year, a little bit on business valuation, if you'd like to hear more about that. But two things that I've noticed, and those are the next two things in the financial model, and we continue to see this year after year, is that marketing costs over time continue to decrease. And the reason for that is simply that today's parent base makes decisions based on social media, typically Google, searches, I've heard some great responses from people with Yelp, and I've also heard some great ones with Pandora Radio as a marketing avenue. So where 30 years ago it was Yellow Pages or Yellow Pages for marketing, today it's much more effective. It reaches people faster, and it's much more cost effective. So we've seen a decrease there. At the same time, we've seen cost increase in benefits, and among the larger companies, this is mainly related to the compliance with affordable care, more commonly known as Obamacare. And I'd like to give some parameters on that, but I'm not sure that I've seen the companies that we work with really stabilize and what their expectations of cost increase are there yet. So hopefully during 2016, I can give a little more information on how much it's costing and what percent of the labor force is actually using that benefit, and kind of give people, I get the question a good bit recently, if I add a second school, I'm probably getting to the place where I'm needing to be affordable care compliant. Is it even going to be worth it for me to take this school and then have to provide health care for both schools? Will that get rid of the potential positive change in profits that I would have realized anyway? So not sure that I have that information yet, but I certainly will keep an eye on that during the next year and let you guys know. Increasing tuition rates. I want to give a big shout out to people who finally felt comfortable enough to do this in the last year or two. So I'm a big proponent of charging for the services that you're providing. As a matter of fact, I think we're our own worst enemies in a lot of cases where the population in general keeps the tuition rates below the service that we're providing. And then I've got owners and companies out there really struggling. It's my opinion that you can't struggle and do what you intended to do in your company, which was to provide quality care. There's no way you can struggle financially and continue to have a solid workforce and provide them benefits and upgrade your facility and constantly add to your curriculum. They just have to go together. So it's, to charge a healthy tuition rate is just vital. And a lot of times I think that parents even use tuition rate as a gauge of quality if they don't know what else to use. So it's just something very important to pay attention to. But the trend that we saw, many very successful schools didn't raise tuition rates for 5 or 6 years, which makes me crazy. We saw a loosening of that over the last year, and we're starting to see people get back to their regular tuition rate increases. on the webinar that we did last year, we did some ideas about how to catch up if you fell behind and you were a good bit behind what you could raise in a year. There are some ways that you can kind of get caught up without sacrificing your current parent base. And also some ideas about minimizing discounts that would get you a little further. If I start on that, we're going to get on my soapbox for an hour, and I don't want to take up the time to do that. But I find myself answering a lot of questions about that, so check that out. And the last thing I'd like to mention in changing business operations is that we're seeing pretty good success with borrowing funds for new schools or new capital improvements, and most of this money seems to be coming from the traditional SBA sources for smaller companies. SBA is always quite challenging to work with, but completely worth it if you're a small business owner. And we're seeing some good success with community banks and lending. And we'll talk a little bit more about some larger financial organizations and their interest in the industry, but just among the smaller companies, those seem to be successful. I think I've got a couple of questions here. Before I leave the part on business, I want to just check out really quickly. Okay, we've got federal law changed and requires them to partner with child care centers. We must be talking about Head Start. The terms are up to the two parties to work out. Oh, fabulous. So I've got a comment here, and I appreciate this because this is exactly how I share information with other people, that federal law has changed and now requires them, who I think we're talking about Head Start, to partner with child care centers. The terms are up to the two parties to work out. Fabulous. Thank you for that. How would we find out about the potential competition coming to our cities, specifically the franchises? Do they share it publicly? Typically, no. You know, they're a business owner just like anyone else, and unless you find it out informally, I'm not sure that there's a place to go. A lot of companies will share coming soon sites on their website. At what point? I think it really varies. So I don't think there's an official place to go to find out who might be coming to your area. But really good question. I'll give that one a little bit more thought before we get back together. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the buying and selling patterns. And what I want to do is start with what happened with some larger transactions during 2015 in the industry. And I start with this because it sets the bar for what happens in any transaction. So as the community of education makes investments in different companies, what happens to the largest companies trickles down into the value for smaller companies. So it's also in our industry a challenge to get public information. Like I said, there's one publicly traded childcare group in the country, and that's Bright Horizons. Their information, of course, because they're publicly traded, is available to the public. They're a bit of a different animal because of their employer-sponsored element, so even then it's a bit hard to compare your results with theirs. So it's a challenge to get that information, and most of what we know is informal. But as far as I know, there were 3 large-ish transactions that were closed in 2015. Nobel Learning, who is a very strong company that operates preschool, K+ schools, and also has a web-based high school, traded from one equity group to another last year. KLC, which is the company that owns Childcare, Children's World, also traded last year. And more recently, and I say large, I consider anything to be more than about 20 schools large, although those guys have hundreds. a company called Little Sprouts in the Northeast transitioned to an equity group. So the reported multiples for these, and by multiple I mean the value paid for these companies, was higher than we have seen in quite a long time in all three cases. And we have also seen an increase in what's being paid for companies. So I'm going to leave that where it is because I'm going to get down to a section on valuation. But I like to mention the larger transactions that happened during the year, because again, whether you think that they relate to you if you have a single site in one individual town or not, they really do have an impact on what happens in valuation. It's just like if you're selling a house in the neighborhood, a house that got sold in the neighborhood at a different value, whether it was higher, the same, or lower, impacts your value. So it really does make a difference in what your company is worth. The next thing I'd like to talk about is who are the people out in the world as business buyers. And the first bucket of people who are investing in the industry are companies who might be competitors to the seller. They are companies that already operate in the industry. Most of these guys are, so first of all, let me say that if they're a multi-site company that has any type of individual or institutional investors in the company, their mission is to grow. And so you want to take a company and you want to make it stronger, but you also want it to be bigger, which makes it more valuable. And so we're seeing a good bit, and this has been our historical buyer base in my 30 years now in July of managing transactions in the industry. There's never, except for the 2009-10 time period when actually everyone was doing okay, but most everyone took a real wait and see approach on buying. There's always been a pretty solid group of companies who have grown, and that's how they grow their company. They also build new schools, but they're your main buyer base. So they want to add companies and schools to their portfolio. Generally, if they're in the same geographic area, if they have the same type culture, if they have a high quality curriculum and they match what they're already doing, then they're an easy tuck-in acquisition. So the competitor companies are the main buyer base in the country. And we're seeing their continued interest in continuing to grow. So that's the first bucket. We've seen a real surge, and this has actually happened since about 2009 and 10. We really started to get contacted more, and it happens continually, by private equity companies who want to be in the market but aren't. And in case, so I like to assume that we don't know anything here, and so explain everything. A private equity company is a company that takes private individual money and invests it in companies, and then they make the decision on what to buy and use that as an investment, and at some point sell to make money back for their investors. So those guys have really recognized the education industry as a stable place to put their money, and that says a lot for us as an industry. It's a big compliment. So there's a lot of interest among that group and buying a company to get started and then to add on to it, which would make them become a competitor company, as we said. The last one that's been really interesting that I've just gotten introduced to in a big way in 2015, although I've been aware of for many years, is a concept called search funding. And search funding got its start in the middle 1980s, when the concept is that investors financially support an individual or individuals while they go out and look for a company to buy and operate, basically. So you might have one or two people who want to go buy a company, and it could be in a particular industry, but not necessarily. and they financially support them through a process. Some of those that I've heard recently get financially supported for 2 years while they go out and try to find a company to buy and operate, and then they go back and present that opportunity to the investors who make the decision about whether to accept that investment. So really interesting concept that I've seen a good bit of interest from in the last 12 months. So not sure exactly where that's coming from. There was at least one search funder who is successfully now in a company that traded recently and it was successful. So that could be where that's coming from. But we'll continue to watch that trend because it's different and a very interesting change in the industry. Let's talk then about, I'm going to check real quickly, got a couple of questions. Let me see if we need to explain them now. Explain the benefits to a seller of selling the business separately from the real estate. Okay, well, let's talk about that just briefly while we're on business buyers. First of all, let me say there's a tremendous amount of information about this in our business and real estate valuation webinars from last year. There are 2 different ones, and we addressed this in a lot of detail. But good question. Just basically, it's my opinion. So first of all, a lot of people don't think about the concept that you have value in your business and you have value in your real estate, and they can be managed and realized completely independently of each other. So you have, as the business owner who owns their business and real estate, there would be multiple opportunities to move your business and or real estate or together. So it's possible to sell your business, maintain the real estate as an investment asset, and either keep it for the long term or sell it to another investor later. So that's an interesting concept. You could sell your real estate to an investor who would then lease it back to you if you needed funds for something. You wanted to buy another school, you wanted to invest in something different, and you would lease it back and just own the business. And then there's the opportunity to sell both at once. Depending on who you sell to, I would make completely different recommendations about how you did both of those things, whether they were together or not, whether you take the risk of someone else operating your real estate, or whether you take the risk of a relationship with a new landlord. So there are a lot of little nuances in the particular tenant and buyer and the risk associated with that. But that's basically, there are multiple options in how you can do that. One more before I move on. How do you see mandated universal pre-K and up to $15 minimum wage potential impacting the future sale of schools in the industry? Okay, 2 really good questions. I'm gonna hang on to those 2 till the end because those are great questions, and I want to be sure that we hit those at the end. So I'm gonna finish up the transaction conversation first. But thank you for that. Okay, so so for real estate buyers, let's go over and talk about that for a minute. And good lead in on this independence of a business transaction and real estate transaction, because again, they can be handled completely separately or together. Real estate buyers of the world have been very interesting. So I have to say probably in the last 2 years, this has been the biggest change. While we saw more private equity investment in the industry get started about 2009 and 10, it seems that the real estate investment community noticed that and took a stronger interest in the industry maybe 3 or 4 years ago, but in a big way about 2 years ago. So the first term that you see here, REIT, stands for Real Estate Investment Trust. And what they do is this, similar to what private equity companies do for business, these guys do for real estate. They invest private money, but they only buy real estate. So while the private equity guys are buying the businesses, these guys are buying the related real estate. And there's some that buy any type. There's some that specialize in certain industries. And in our industries, we have seen 5 groups. Historically, there were 2 that we've worked with for many years. We've seen 3 more really enter the industry in a big way in the last couple of years. We found them to be tremendously great to work with. We have helped several of our clients sell their real estate to one of these guys for growth. We have matched them up with business buyers who don't want to or don't have the funding to also buy the real estate. So often we have 2 different groups buying them both, but the investment among these guys has been tremendous. The positives are that they are cash buyers. They have a very easy, seamless process. It's just they're sophisticated buyers, so is less confusion about the process, and we have found them to be great to work with. So that's been one very interesting thing. Individual buyers are definitely worth mentioning as well. So where we saw those guys really back off of real estate in not just 2009 and 10, it really extended through 11 and 12 in most markets. And then when they began to buy real estate again, they really wanted things that were either distressed or a very good deal, which makes sense. If you're a real estate buyer and that's what you do as an investment, the first thing you want to do is look for things that are a very good deal. How it feels to us after last year is that most of that has normalized now, and we're starting to see strong investment among individuals in the industry again at numbers that are favorable. So we'll talk about that a little bit more, I think, on the next slide, which is what we see happening in valuation. So the first thing I wanted to mention here is that we do see more caution, and this makes sense. And I think anytime you have a strong market change, you see people a little more cautious about being sure that numbers are verifiable. They do a little more due diligence work in the process. Some of our larger clients, and especially for larger transactions, will employ an accounting firm to actually do this process for them. And so we're seeing a little more work, and what has to happen to get through the process is just like what we're seeing in banking, where it's not nearly as easy to borrow money as it used to be. And we are seeing some loosening of that, like I mentioned, but still the requirements for people and information has increased. But we are seeing and have seen both the multiples. So let me say this simply, multiples increasing means that we're seeing bigger values than ever being paid for businesses. I think there was one time in our industry where one particular national group was paying pretty big numbers for companies, and then that stopped. Overall, the industry has been pretty similar in how we value. And again, there's a business valuation webinar on our website if you want to know more technical information about that. But we have seen an increase over the last year. So in some cases, we're being a little more pushy about what we're asking for values just to see where the market's going to go. Because as a seller, the last thing you want to do is have someone accept your asking price immediately and you go, maybe didn't ask enough. So we're pushing a little bit, but not to the point where we turn people off. We are seeing cap rates decreasing, means that the capitalization rate that investors expect to get on a real estate investment, as those decrease, the price of the property actually increases. So what we're seeing there is greater values in real estate as well. So our experience over the last 12 months has been very favorable for sellers, more competition from buyers, national groups that have sold at numbers that were strong. And so all of these conditions are making this a pretty favorable market for sellers right now. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what we think might happen next year, and then we'll take some questions, including the great one that we got here on minimum wage. Okay, so what do we think is going to happen in 2016? Every time I get this question, I, give my prediction with such confidence, and I follow that by saying, but I never would have predicted 2009 and 10, so you might not want to listen to me. But, just based on what we see, we really do believe that there will be continued investment in the industry, even if we have an economic downturn. It seemed that our industry was more stable than most. So what we heard regularly as other industries really took a dive in 2009 and 10, as a whole, it seemed that our industry dropped about 10% on the top line. That's pretty stable, and especially in an environment where we can match our cost up pretty well and hold our bottom line constant, or at least not devastatingly bad with a 10% drop on the top line. So I think we'll continue to see investment in the industry, not just among individuals in the franchise groups, but also among the investment community who considers us to be a stable and increasingly important and increasingly I can't find my word, sophisticated as an industry and in educational institutions. The second thing is that I don't see any reason that the values we see right now won't at least be stable. There's a limit to how much more they can increase and still make sense, I think. I think if we hit a real high, then I start to get a little bit nervous, because I like it when we're smart about it, but we're at the top of our game. So I think that we may increase some more. I think we'll definitely see continued roll up. And by that, I mean that the larger organizations will continue to want to buy. They will become bigger. It's I don't know if you guys get the Exchange Magazine Top 50 list, but I get that list, and it gets published in their January, February magazine. And every year I draw little arrows up from whoever sold to whoever that's a little bit bigger than them. So I think we'll continue to see roll up of companies into larger organizations. We will definitely see more new site development. It's not just the franchise who are considering this. Some of the other national companies and smaller regionals have pretty aggressive goals for new site development. We've seen a big increase among our clients for new sites and markets that they like, and a good bit of development going on. There were a good many new schools opened in 2015, and the reports from the people that we work with are a lot more in the works for 16 and beyond. There are a couple of new brands being launched, even among the national groups that have decided to grow by new site development. They are launching new brands so that they come out, with a new school that's fresh and doesn't either have the burden of an older brand or the perception of a newer one that may or may not be strong in that market. So there's some new brands being launched. I love that I'm also seeing a very energetic 30, early 40 something crowd who have multiple sites and can't wait to grow and do awesome things in the industry. So that's just fabulous, and love seeing that. So we are 44 minutes in, so good timing. Let me go back and address this question, please. If you have any more, just feel free to go over to your question bar to the right and type those in for us, and then I'll take as many as I can, and we will get you back on your way at 2 Eastern. So again, how do you see mandated universal pre-K affecting the industry? Let's address that. Man, I got hit with this question a lot last year, and mainly from the investment community that was trying to figure out just how stable this industry was, and whether universal pre-K was a risk. Yeah, so if universal pre-K was mandated and private providers were not allowed to participate, It's definitely got an impact on the market. We've seen in certain states where pre-K has been implemented, and I'm one that has, you know, in my 30 years, I have worked through 5-year-old kindergarten, formerly being half day and then going to full day, and then a lot of states, 4-year kindergarten in public schools, going from half day in some states now going to full day, in some states where it is universal and people can participate or not. And it definitely has an impact. The main impact that I see there is those programs are typically very robust, and the educational requirements for teachers and ratios are usually set so that it's a break-even program. And where in schools those are very profitable programs, if you take those to a break-even program, then financially it can be a drain. So the benefit of those, though, I think when you can participate, are that the quality level goes up in not just those classes, but also in the entire school. You can do well financially if you can keep those students for wraparound for early mornings and afternoon. And as we know, after school is our most profitable program. Most people would charge about half the tuition rate of a 3-year-old and have them 3 hours a day instead of 9 or 10. So you can do well that way if you can keep them. The real trick is the participation, and it takes a lot of lobbying by providers in that state and in that area, which is very hard for people to do when they're running a company. I think we'll continue the talk. It would surprise me greatly if any time in the near future we would have universal pre-K that private providers were not able to participate in. I just don't know how it would happen any other way. So I'm not one that thinks that it's a devastating risk, but it is to be watched just like any other change in the industry, and to be adapted to so that your business and core business is intact. What do I see about minimum wage at $15 an hour? First of all, I'd like to say that minimum wage increase is one of, in my opinion, from what I've seen, is one of the reasons that you can share with parents that's completely accepted to increase your tuition rates pretty drastically. So I like that when you increase your tuition rates, you give parents a reason for that, and then you also share with them the great things you've done in your school and the great things that you intend to do the next year. If you include minimum wage as one of the reasons for a tuition rate increase, it seems to be pretty widely accepted and not, if parents can still afford you, then they understand that that's one of the reasons that costs go up. And really, you have to explain that it's not just minimum wage staff that are going to be impacted by this. If your minimum wage goes from $8 to $9 an hour, then you can't have a 2 or 3 year teacher at minimum wage anymore at $9 an hour. So that person has to go up as well, which also impacts your payroll tax expenses. So will it affect the industry in a negative way? I'm not sure. It would surprise me if it went to $15 broadly, but I think that as it goes up, and probably will, then it's one of the things that I think parents can work with you and feel okay about as a tuition rate increase. Let's see. How do you see Department of Labor raise of exempt wages to $50,000 impacting us, director pay? I'm not sure that I do see that as an impact, and maybe I need a little more information there. I'm not sure how that would impact director pay. So in my opinion, I don't know how it would. So maybe give me a little more information if I'm missing something there. Can you give us an idea of the range of cap rates and valuation multiples? Sure. So
So the range is quite wide, and it's dependent on many, many, many factors. So let me say that, and every situation is unique. And it's not only specific to the seller and their situation, it's also specific to the buyer and their situation. So let me speak to multiples real quickly first. So the industry has typically been, for a single site, a 3 to 5 multiple industry. And I'm just going to assume for this purpose, because I don't think we have time to really explain multiples in great detail. Again, I'm going to refer you back to the business valuation workshop. We have seen an increase there, unless it's been distressed or been in an undesirable area or have a lot of subsidy. We really haven't seen anything go under a 4 multiple in quite a while. Reportedly, and again, know that this is informal, the large transactions that closed last year that I mentioned initially went in the 8 to 11 multiple range, which is very high for the industry, even for very large companies. And there's some mid-sized transactions reported in the 6 to 8 range. So, if I had to look at the range very broadly, I would say 3 to 11, and I know that's tremendous, but only over 8 when you're very sizable, and only up to 5 or 6 for a small group that checks all the boxes. Things that impact it are geographic area, age of facility, amount of subsidy, quality of curriculum, gross revenues. And so there's a tremendous variety in the multiple there. As far as, let's see, did I get asked about cap rates? Because, yeah. So cap rates, and on the multiple, if I told somebody just, if you want to use a conservative multiple and see where your company might be, just use 4. And you can always go up from there. So that'd be a good place to start as an average. Where do you see cap rates nationally for childcare real estate? Okay, we asked for the multiple. So cap rate, again, so capitalization rate is the return on investment that investors want when they buy real estate. This can range, we have seen it come down. I think it can range anywhere from 7.5 to, it's been a while since I've seen a 9, but let me say that if I've got an older property, and it can go above or below. But I tell people there, if you really want to use an average, use something between 8 and 8.5, and that would give you an indication of where your real estate value might be. Again, a separate webinar on capitalization rates, and it gets a little complicated and technical. But if you understand those together and you want to look at your real estate, use something in the 8 to 8.5 range. Lost sound again? Okay, hopefully I'm back. Do you see a trend in the industry regarding organic food and whether centers need to improve their food quality even at the expense of higher food costs? Definitely. So maybe not so much organic food, but definitely a trend in the industry toward healthier food choices. Some interesting trends here. So let me mention a couple of things. There is a trend for parents to bring their own lunch, especially at higher demographic schools. And this is something you can start out doing very well. It's kind of hard to change to, but it's easy to get started with. And it's almost a fun thing for families. Children have little containers of hummus, and they have their vegetable sticks. And so you can make up for some higher food costs by doing some things like that. Another trend that I see is payment by automatic draft as mandatory. Again, something that is much easier to start your school with than to switch to, but I've seen both done. A real trend away from accepting cash as a payment. I tell people if that's the only way you can get your money, take it. But, nobody likes to deal with cash. So definitely a trend, not only for higher quality food, but also for more, a little different than typical wellness for children, which would have included nutrition education and physical education. I see a real trend toward mindfulness is a term I've heard before that includes things like yoga and includes things like meditation for children. I know you've got a few you love to learn how to meditate. And so a real trend toward those types of programs for children. And I love that. So, and it's seen some very successful ones. Let's see what we have. Okay. So thank you, Jim, for this question. This is more information about exempt wages. Gauged by the number of hours the director works, exempt would require a $50,000 wage or lower. Paid directors would be paid overtime if under 50,000. Okay, really good question. I'm not sure. That's a good question. I will address that. Let me give that some thought and ask a couple of people their opinion. Like I said, all I do is collect opinions and then share them with the world. I'm not as good at making them up. But that's an interesting question. I appreciate you asking it. And I will, I'll get back in my industry update in our April webinar and have more information on that. Do you see a trend in leasing out a facility on a Saturday or Sunday to a church or other organization to increase revenue? Definitely. We've seen this in the industry for a long time. Our facilities make great facilities for a church that's growing. They are at completely different times. They will typically use a multi-purpose room for their worship space and a classroom or a couple of classrooms for their childcare space. And those collaborations work really well. I'm seeing a bit of a trend in birthday parties again and facilities that have a really neat atmosphere. And some of the staff enjoy Saturdays and make a little extra money there. So that seems to be picking back up as a concept. There's some things in facilities. I think those are the main things that I see right now, but good question. Any other questions? I think that's the end of the ones that I have. There we go. Curious what Head Start is paying. We get $25 a day, which is not enough to other Head Start locations pay more. Don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Really good question. And I'll also report back on that. I suspect that it's regionally different, but I don't know that for sure. And I will certainly report more information on that. So someone just said yes. I'm not sure if they're answering yes to that question. But we will certainly gather some more information on that. Any additional questions? 30 seconds. Ask them fast. What would the real estate and business go for together? Good question. So, completely impossible to answer without knowing a good bit of information. So when we value business and real estate, we do a complete valuation as you would an appraisal. It depends on so many factors. So we value the business based on what the successor company can make off of it. And it is dependent on the age of the building, the quality of the programming, the tuition rates, the gross revenues. I could go on and give you a laundry list of things. We provide valuations of both businesses and real estate for potential sellers free of charge. We're happy to get to know you and help you run a valuation of your school. To answer that generically would just be really hard to do. Understand your question though. If I were to sell my operation and keep the real estate, would I assume a foreign multiple to value the operation or a blended multiple? Yeah, so it would be valued just based on the business multiple, but again, has to be valued based on what the go-forward cash flow would be, and the multiple is completely dependent on so many factors. So reach out to us, please, and let us support you on that. I would hate to steer you in the wrong direction without knowing more. So we're at the end of our hour. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. There will be a survey sent to you We love your feedback, good, bad, or neutral. We want to make this time valuable for you, so we would appreciate your thoughts on any future webinars and areas of interest for you. And we'll look forward to talking with you soon. Thanks so much. Have a great afternoon.